I gave my mom a $57,000 Tesla for her birthday. She looked at the keys, called it inappropriate, and pushed them back across the table. Then she tried to scam me out of 40,000 more. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a simple act of love became the most expensive lesson of my life and how it finally set me free. You want to know what $57,000 can teach you about family? That sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that finally set you free. I'm Hallie, and 3 years ago I made a decision that cost me everything I thought I wanted, but gave me everything I actually needed. This is the story of how I bought my mother's love, lost it, and discovered something far more valuable in the process. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood because understanding where I came from is crucial to understanding why I made the choices I did. I was 9 years old when my mother Caroline decided that being a wife and mother wasn't her authentic self. Those were her exact words, by the way. She left them in a letter addressed to my father David that I found on the kitchen table one Thursday morning in March. But here's the thing nobody talks about when a parent abandons their family. It's not just the leaving that destroys you. It's the way everyone else pretends it's normal. My father didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't even seem surprised. He just folded that letter, put it in his wallet, and said, "Guess we'll figure it out as we go, kiddo." For 7 years, it was just him and me. But David wasn't built to be a single parent. He was an engineer who solved problems with logic and spreadsheets, not emotions and conversations. So I learned to solve myself. I figured out how to make mac and cheese at 10, how to forge his signature on permission slips at 11, and how to lie to teachers about why my clothes weren't always clean at 12. I became the invisible child in my own home, tiptoeing around my father's quiet grief and my own confusion. I convinced myself that if I was just perfect enough, straight A's, no trouble, no needs, maybe I could fill the hole my mother left behind. Maybe I could be enough for him to stay. Then when I turned 16, Caroline came back. Not gradually, not with explanation or apology, but like a hurricane that had decided to reverse direction. She walked through our front door on a Tuesday afternoon carrying designer luggage and a new attitude. She'd spent 7 years finding herself in California working at a wellness retreat doing yoga teacher training and apparently getting plastic surgery because she looked 10 years younger than when she left. The first words out of her mouth weren't, "I'm sorry" or "I missed you." They were, "This house needs a complete renovation. David, we need to talk about your decorating choices." And you know what my father did? He welcomed her back like she'd been gone for a weekend instead of 7 years. No questions about where she'd been, who she'd been with, or why she thought she could just waltz back into our lives. It was like he'd been holding his breath for 7 years and could finally exhale. Within 6 months, they were married again. Yes, they actually had a second wedding that I wasn't invited to help plan. Within 18 months, my half-sister Sophia was born. And suddenly, Caroline transformed into the mother she'd never been to me. She documented Sophia's every breath on social media. First smile, first word, first step, all captured in professional quality photos with captions like, "My heart outside my body, and never knew love like this existed." She joined mommy groups, attended mommy and me classes, threw elaborate birthday parties with custom decorations and hired photographers. Meanwhile, I was a senior in high school working part-time at a grocery store to save money for college and living in the same house but feeling like a ghost from Caroline's previous life. When I graduated as valedictorian, Caroline showed up 20 minutes late because Sophia had a diaper blowout. She spent my graduation ceremony bouncing my half-sister and shushing her instead of listening to my speech. I moved out 3 days after graduation with $700 in my savings account and a scholarship to community college. I was 18 and felt like I was finally free to build a life where I mattered to someone. But here's what they don't tell you about growing up with a parent who abandoned you. You spend the rest of your life trying to prove you're worth staying for. Even after I moved out, even after I built my own life, I kept trying to earn Caroline's love like it was a prize I could win, if I just worked hard enough. I threw myself into my studies, working 2 jobs to put myself through college. I got my degree in marketing, landed a good job at a advertising agency in Denver, bought my own car, my own apartment. I thought if I could just be successful enough, independent enough, impressive enough, she'd finally see me as worthy of her attention. When I met Marcus at 25, I thought I'd finally found someone who would choose me first. He was charming, ambitious, working in pharmaceutical sales, and he made me feel like the most important person in his world. We dated for 2 years, and I genuinely believed we were building something real together. I was so desperate to prove to my family that I was lovable that I pushed our relationship faster than it should have gone. When Marcus proposed on my 27th birthday, I said yes immediately, even though something in my gut was screaming that it wasn't right. I wanted Caroline to see that someone had chosen me, that I was worthy of being someone's first priority. The wedding planning became an obsession for me. I spent 18 months crafting the perfect day, convinced that if Caroline could just see how beautiful my wedding was, how happy I looked, how much Marcus loved me, she'd finally be proud of me. I invited her to go dress shopping, to help with flowers, to be involved in every detail. She came to exactly one appointment, the final dress fitting, where she spent the entire time on her phone dealing with some crisis involving Sophia's preschool admissions. When I walked out in my wedding dress, hoping for tears or gasps or some kind of emotional reaction, she glanced up and said, "Very nice, honey." Very classic, before going back to her phone call. The wedding itself was beautiful, but Caroline spent most of the reception chasing after 4-year-old Sophia, who had a meltdown during the ceremony and refused to sit still during dinner. In all our wedding photos, you can see Caroline in the background looking harried and distracted. Even on my wedding day, I came second to Sophia. Marcus and I were happy for about 18 months. But the cracks started showing when we began trying to start our family. Month after month of negative pregnancy tests revealed that Marcus had a very different vision of our future than I did. He wanted to wait to travel more to focus on our careers. I wanted children desperately, partly because I craved the unconditional love I'd never received, and partly because I wanted to prove I could be a better mother than Caroline had been to me. The fight started small but grew bigger. Marcus began working later, traveling more, and I began to suspect there were other women. I hired a private investigator and discovered he'd been having affairs for over a year, not just one woman, but several. When I confronted him, he didn't even bother lying. "You've been suffocating me since we got married," he said. "You want too much, need too much. I can't be responsible for filling some hole your mother left in you." Those words destroyed me, partly because they were cruel, but mostly because they were true. The divorce was finalized just after my 30th birthday. I kept the house, he kept his cheating heart, and I was left to rebuild my life from scratch. But this time I was determined to do it differently. I was going to focus on myself, create the life I actually wanted, instead of the life I thought would impress Caroline. That lasted about 6 months until I met Jake at a coffee shop near my office. Jake was different from Marcus in every way that mattered. He was a teacher, kind and gentle, with these incredible blue eyes that actually saw me when he looked at me. He listened when I talked, remembered details about my day, made me feel like I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met. Jake didn't care about impressing anyone or climbing corporate ladders. He cared about his students, about making a difference, about building a quiet, meaningful life. For the first time, I felt like someone loved me exactly, as I was not as who I could become or what I could provide. We were together for 2 years, and they were the happiest years of my adult life. Jake talked about marriage, about children, about growing old together. I finally felt like I was building the family I'd always dreamed of, one based on choice and love instead of obligation and disappointment. Then Jake was diagnosed with leukemia. The 18 months that followed were a blur of hospitals, treatments, hope, and heartbreak. Jake fought harder than anyone I'd ever seen fight for anything. He was determined to beat cancer so we could have our future together. I took leave from work to care for him. Spent my savings on experimental treatments, insurance wouldn't cover, and prayed to gods I'd never believed in. Caroline visited exactly twice during those 18 months. Once when Jake was first diagnosed, where she stayed for 20 minutes and spent most of the time talking about Sophia's violin lessons. And once near the end, where she brought flowers and left within 10 minutes because hospitals made her uncomfortable. Jake died on a Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand and whispering that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I was 33, a widow, and more alone than I'd ever been in my life. The grief counselor told me that losing Jake would change me, but she didn't tell me it would also clarify everything. Sitting in that hospital room, holding the hand of the only person who had ever truly loved me, I realized that I'd spent my entire life chasing the wrong thing. I'd been trying to earn love from someone who wasn't capable of giving it instead of recognizing and cherishing the love that was freely given. But grief makes people do irrational things. And 18 months after Jake died, when I was still drowning in loneliness and searching for meaning, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to try one more time to build a relationship with Caroline. Not because I thought she'd changed, but because I couldn't bear the thought of being completely alone. I started small. Phone calls, coffee dates, inviting her to lunch. Caroline seemed genuinely surprised by my efforts, but gradually began to respond. We started having weekly dinners, shopping trips, even took a weekend vacation to Napa Valley together. For 6 months, I thought we were finally building the relationship I'd always wanted. That's when Caroline told me she and David were buying a vacation home in Aspen, a $2 million mountain retreat where the family could gather for holidays and summers. The family, of course, being Caroline, David, Sophia, and Sophia's new husband, Brandon, who was a hedge fund manager and Caroline's obvious favorite son-in-law. It's going to be our legacy, Caroline told me over lunch. A place where future generations can make memories together. I wasn't included in the planning, the decorating, or even the initial guest lists. When I asked about it, Caroline said, "Oh, honey, you're always welcome to visit, but you know how small the guest room is." That's when I made the decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I was going to give Caroline a gift so generous, so unprecedented, so impressive, that she'd finally see me as an equal member of this family. I was going to buy them a car that would put their vacation home to shame. Not just any car, a fully loaded Tesla Model X, the most expensive SUV on the market. $79,000 before taxes and fees. By the time I added every possible upgrade, the premium interior, the enhanced autopilot, the custom paint job, in Caroline's favorite color, the total came to $57,432 in dollars. I liquidated my retirement account, took out a loan against my house, and even sold Jake's wedding ring to pay for it. It took me 4 months to get the financing together, but I did it. I was going to give Caroline the most generous gift she'd ever received, and she was finally going to see me as the daughter who would do anything for her family. I planned to surprise her at her 59th birthday party. I imagined the look on her face when I handed her the keys, the gratitude, the recognition, that I was the daughter who truly loved her. I imagined her posting about it on social media, bragging to her friends about her generous daughter finally giving me the public acknowledgement I'd craved my entire life. I spent weeks planning every detail of the reveal. I arranged for the car to be delivered and parked 2 blocks away from their house. I made dinner reservations at Caroline's favorite restaurant. I even bought her a beautiful jewelry box to hide the keys in, wrapped in gold paper with an enormous bow. The night before the party, I could barely sleep. I kept imagining different scenarios, different ways Caroline might react, different things she might say. I practiced my speech about how much she meant to me, how grateful I was to have her back in my life, how this gift represented a new beginning for our relationship. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, practically vibrating with excitement. Caroline, David, and Sophia were already seated at our reserved table, looking like the perfect family in their coordinated colors and designer clothes. Brandon was there too, checking his phone and looking bored. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, placing the beautifully wrapped jewelry box in front of Caroline. She smiled and began unwrapping it carefully, making comments about how pretty the paper was. When she opened the box and saw the Tesla keys inside, her face went completely blank. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a Tesla Model X," I said, my heart pounding. "Top of the line, every upgrade your favorite color. It's parked right outside. Happy birthday." The silence at the table was deafening. Caroline stared at the keys like they were a dead animal. David looked uncomfortable. Sophia looked confused. Brandon looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. Hallie, Caroline said slowly, "This is too much." "No, it's not," I said quickly. "You deserve it. You deserve the best of everything. I wanted to show you how much you mean to me." Caroline closed the jewelry box and pushed it back across the table toward me. "I can't accept this," she said. "It's inappropriate. Inappropriate. That word hit me like a slap." "What do you mean inappropriate?" "I mean it's too expensive, too flashy, too much," Caroline said, her voice getting sharper. "What are people going to think? That my daughter is trying to buy my love." The restaurant around us seemed to go completely quiet. I could feel other diners staring at our table, could see the waiter hovering nearby, unsure whether to approach. "I'm not trying to buy your love," I whispered. "I'm trying to show you that I love you." "Well, this isn't the way to do it," Caroline snapped. "This is exactly the kind of dramatic gesture I'd expect from you. Everything has to be about you, doesn't it? Even my birthday has to become some grand performance where you're the star." Those words shattered something inside me that I hadn't even realized was still fragile. I sat there staring at this woman I'd spent 34 years trying to please, and suddenly saw her clearly for the first time. "You're right," I said quietly. "This was a mistake." I picked up the jewelry box, put it in my purse, and stood up. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, "and happy birthday." I walked out of that restaurant and kept walking until I reached the Tesla. I sat in the driver's seat of the $57,000 car I'd bought for a woman who would never ever see me as worthy of her love, and I finally understood what Jake had been trying to tell me all along. The people who truly love you don't make you audition for their affection. I drove that Tesla home, parked it in my driveway, and made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was done performing for Caroline's approval. I was done trying to earn love from someone who wasn't capable of giving it. I was done being the daughter who would sacrifice everything for breadcrumbs of affection. But what happened next? Well, that's when Caroline showed me exactly who she really was, and exactly how far she was willing to go to manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. Because you see, saying no to someone who's used to getting everything they want from you doesn't make them respect your boundaries. It makes them declare war. The war Caroline declared wasn't fought with weapons or words. It was fought with something far more insidious: social media manipulation, emotional blackmail, and the kind of psychological warfare that only a narcissistic mother could orchestrate. It started the very next morning after the restaurant incident. I woke up to 17 missed calls from my half-sister Sophia, 3 voicemails from my father David, and a text message that made my blood run cold. "Mom's in the hospital. Heart palpitations. Doctor says it's stress-related. Hope you're happy." I threw on clothes and drove to Denver General, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Despite everything Caroline had put me through, she was still my mother. The thought that my rejection had literally broken her heart filled me with the kind of guilt only a lifetime of emotional manipulation can create. When I burst through the emergency room doors, I found Caroline sitting up in bed, perfectly made up, surrounded by flowers, and looking like she was holding court rather than recovering from a medical emergency. Sophia was there along with David and even Brandon with his ever-present phone. "Oh, Hallie," Caroline said, weakly pressing her hand to her chest. "I'm so glad you came. The doctor says my heart just couldn't handle the shock of last night. But something felt off." Caroline's voice had that same theatrical quality she'd used when I was a child, and she'd wanted sympathy after one of her episodes. Her makeup was too perfect, her hair too styled for someone who'd supposedly been rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. "What exactly happened?" I asked, looking directly at David. "Your mother woke up around 3 a.m. with chest pains and difficulty breathing," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "The paramedics said her heart rate was elevated. Panic attack symptoms," I said flatly. "The doctors are running tests," Sophia interjected quickly. "They want to keep her overnight for observation." I stayed for 2 hours, watching Caroline perform her illness for every visitor who stopped by. She had a steady stream of friends from her yoga class neighbors, even people I didn't recognize. To each one she told the same story, how her eldest daughter had rejected her birthday gift and caused such emotional trauma that her heart nearly stopped. But here's what she didn't know I knew. Brandon had posted an Instagram story the night before at 2:15 a.m., showing him and Sophia out at a downtown bar laughing and taking shots. If Caroline had been rushed to the hospital around 3 a.m. with chest pains, why were her daughter and son-in-law out partying just 45 minutes earlier? I said nothing. I just kissed Caroline's forehead, told her I hoped she felt better, and left. But I was starting to see the pattern. Over the next week, Caroline's recovery became a social media production. She posted daily updates about her fragile condition, always managing to look gorgeous in her hospital selfies, always mentioning how family stress had triggered her health crisis. The comments poured in. Friends offering support, acquaintances expressing shock that anyone could be so heartless as to upset a sick woman. She never mentioned the Tesla directly, but she didn't have to. She'd post pictures of herself looking frail and weak with captions like, learning to heal from unexpected family disappointments, and sometimes the people closest to us can break our hearts in ways we never imagined. Meanwhile, I was getting calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all asking the same questions. What had I done to upset Caroline? Didn't I know she'd been hospitalized? How could I be so selfish? The genius of Caroline's campaign was that she never directly accused me of anything. She just painted herself as the wounded mother suffering in noble silence, while her ungrateful daughter lived her life without concern for her mother's well-being. She was rewriting the narrative, and I was helpless to stop it. But the real masterpiece came 2 weeks later when Caroline was released from the hospital, though I suspected she'd been going home every night and just returning for visiting hours. She organized what she called a gratitude gathering at their house, supposedly to thank everyone who'd supported her during her health crisis. She invited everyone we knew mutually, cousins, family, friends, neighbors, even some of my former coworkers she'd somehow tracked down on Facebook. The invitation, which I saw screenshots of from confused relatives, read, "Caroline Matthews invites you to celebrate her recovery and the love of family that helped heal her broken heart." I wasn't invited, of course. But Sophia made sure to live stream portions of the party, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Caroline had transformed herself into the perfect victim, beautiful, gracious, surrounded by love, bravely overcoming the trauma her own daughter had inflicted. She gave a speech thanking everyone for their support during the most difficult time in my life as a mother. She talked about unconditional love, about forgiveness, about how she was praying for her relationship with me to heal. People were crying. They were hugging her. They were telling her what an amazing woman she was to remain so loving in the face of such heartbreak. And then came the gift presentation. Someone had organized a collection among the guests to buy Caroline a healing gift. They presented her with a luxury spa weekend package worth over $3,000. Caroline broke down in tears, saying how overwhelmed she was by such generosity, how this was exactly the kind of love and support that would help her heart heal. The video ended with everyone toasting to Caroline's health and to the power of chosen family, the people who show up when it matters most. I sat in my living room watching this performance on my laptop and felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap. Like a rubber band that had been stretched to its absolute limit and finally reached the breaking point. This wasn't grief over our broken relationship. This wasn't sadness about family dysfunction. This was rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage at being turned into the villain in Caroline's carefully crafted story. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to defend myself against Caroline's accusations. I wasn't going to try to tell my side of the story. I was going to do something far more effective. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. The next morning I drove to Caroline and David's house with the Tesla. I parked it in their driveway, walked up to the front door, and handed David the keys and all the paperwork. "Please give this to Caroline," I said. "Tell her it's her birthday gift with my compliments and my apologies for any stress I caused her." David looked confused. "Hallie, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," I said calmly. "I want her to have it. Consider it my contribution to her healing process." I walked back to my Uber. Yes, I'd arranged a ride because I'd known I wasn't coming back with the Tesla, and left them standing in the driveway holding $57,000 worth of car keys. Within 6 hours, Caroline had posted photos of herself with the Tesla. Beautifully styled photos, of course, with professional lighting and multiple angles. The caption read, "Sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them." My heart is so full of gratitude for this incredible surprise gift from my daughter. Love always finds a way. #blessed, #family, #healing, #gratitude. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. Hundreds of people praising Caroline for her grace and forgiveness, dozens asking about the surprise gift, several demanding to know what kind of car costs enough to warrant such a post. Caroline was getting everything she'd manipulated me into giving her. The expensive gift, the social media validation, the narrative where she was the gracious mother who'd received a generous gesture from her repentant daughter. But here's what Caroline didn't anticipate. I knew her better than she knew herself. Within a month, the Tesla wasn't enough. It never would be. Because the gift had never been about the car, it had been about control. About proving that she could manipulate me into giving her whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. The first request came disguised as a casual conversation. Caroline called to thank me for the car and mentioned almost as an afterthought that she and David were thinking about refinancing their house to consolidate some debt. Nothing major, just some credit card balances that had gotten a little out of hand during her health crisis. You know, she said, her voice taking on that familiar, manipulative tone, it would be so much easier if we could just get a small loan from family instead of dealing with banks and all that paperwork. Something like $30,000 would cover everything. $30,000. Casual, like she was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I'm sure Brandon would be happy to help with that, I said sweetly. Didn't you mention his hedge fund is doing really well, Silence? Then, well, Brandon and Sophia have their own expenses. The baby, the house, Brandon's student loans. Baby. This was the first I'd heard about Sophia being pregnant. Congratulations on the pregnancy, I said. When is Sophia due? Another pause. Oh, well, they're not quite ready to announce yet. You understand. Of course. Another manipulation. Another story designed to make me feel guilty for not offering to help with expenses for a baby that might or might not exist. I'm sure you'll figure out the financing, I said. Banks are usually very reasonable with people who have good credit and stable incomes. After I hung up, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator, the same one I'd used during my divorce from Marcus, to look into Caroline and David's financial situation. What I discovered was fascinating. They weren't in debt from medical bills or Caroline's health crisis. They were in debt because Caroline had been living far beyond their means for years, trying to maintain the lifestyle she projected on social media. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury vacations, the Aspen house payments, it all added up to a monthly burn rate that exceeded David's engineering salary by almost 40%. They'd been funding their lifestyle with credit cards and home equity loans, and the Tesla gift had actually made things worse because now Caroline felt pressure to maintain an even higher standard of living to match her expensive new car. But the most interesting discovery was that Caroline had been telling people for months that I was going to help them buy the Aspen house. She'd apparently been using my supposed financial contribution as collateral for their real estate agent, their contractor, even some of their friends who'd invested in the property. Caroline had been selling the story of my generosity before I'd even given her the Tesla. The car wasn't the beginning of her manipulation campaign. It was just the latest move in a game she'd been playing for months. That's when I realized something that changed my entire perspective on our relationship. Caroline wasn't reacting to my rejection of her love. She was angry that I'd disrupted her business plan. I had never been her daughter in any meaningful sense. I had been her retirement fund. And once I understood, that everything else became crystal clear, including exactly how I was going to end this game once and for all. The beautiful thing about finally understanding someone's true nature is that you can predict their next moves with surgical precision. Caroline was as predictable as a slot machine. She'd keep pulling the lever until she hit the jackpot, and she'd never walk away while there was still money in the machine. I gave her exactly 3 weeks. On day 21, my phone rang. Caroline's number, but it was David's voice on the other end, shaky and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Hallie, we need to talk. Can you come over? It's about your mother. What's wrong with Caroline? I asked already, knowing the answer. Well, she's back in the hospital. This time it's serious. The doctors are running tests, and they're worried about her heart. She keeps asking for you. Back in the hospital. Of course she was. Because the Tesla hadn't solved their financial problems, it had made them worse. Now they had a $70,000 car payment on top of their existing debt, and Caroline needed a bigger gesture to dig them out of the hole she'd created. Which hospital, I asked. Presbyterian St. Joseph. Room 412. Hallie, please. She really needs you right now. I drove to the hospital, but this time I wasn't filled with guilt or panic. I was filled with cold, calculating clarity. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and I knew exactly how it was going to end. Caroline was in room 412, just as David had said. But this time she wasn't perfectly made up and holding court. She looked genuinely ill, pale thin, with dark circles under her eyes. For a moment I felt a flicker of concern. Then I noticed the details that didn't add up. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured. Her eyebrows were freshly shaped. Her hospital gown was somehow fitted and flattering. This wasn't a woman who'd been suddenly struck down by illness. This was a woman who'd had time to prepare for a performance. "Oh, Hallie," she whispered when she saw me. "Thank God you came." I wasn't sure, after everything that's happened. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. "What did the doctors say?" I asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "They're not sure yet. More tests tomorrow. But they're concerned about my heart. The stress of the last few months, the financial pressure. It's taken such a toll. Financial pressure." There it was, the real reason for this hospital stay. "What financial pressure?" I asked innocently. "I thought the Tesla was a healing gift, remember?" Hashtag, blessed Caroline's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, yes, of course, and I'm so grateful, truly. But you know how expensive car payments can be, and with everything else. Everything else. The house payment, the credit cards, the medical bills from my last stay. David's salary only goes so far, and with the Aspen property requiring so much maintenance, she was building up to something. I could feel it coming like a storm gathering on the horizon. "Hallie," she said, reaching out to take my hand with trembling fingers. "I hate to ask, but we're in a really difficult situation. The doctors want to run some expensive tests, and our insurance might not cover everything. We're looking at maybe $40,000 in medical bills, plus we're behind on some payments. $40,000. The ask had increased from 30 to 40 in less than a month. "That's a lot of money," I said softly. I know it is. But you've done so well for yourself, and you don't have the same expenses we do. No mortgage, no other family members depending on you, no other family members depending on me. As if my dead husband Jake had been a luxury rather than the love of my life. As if my childless state was a convenience rather than a source of deep pain. "Have you considered selling the Tesla?" I asked. Silence. Long-telling silence. "Well," Caroline said finally, "it would be such a shame to sell it so soon, and honestly, we'd probably lose money on it. You know how cars depreciate the moment you drive them off the lot." "Actually, Teslas hold their value quite well," I said. "Especially fully loaded ones like yours. You could probably get $50,000 to $55,000 for it, which would cover most of your medical expenses." Caroline's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating flash across her face. Then the tears started. I thought maybe this was our chance to finally be a real family," she said, her voice breaking. "After all these years, I thought maybe we could help each other, support each other. But I understand if you can't. I understand if I've been a disappointment as a mother." The disappointment speech. The final manipulation in her playbook. Make the victim feel guilty for the abuser's behavior, then offer them a chance to prove their love through financial sacrifice. "You're right," I said quietly. "You have been a disappointment as a mother." Caroline's tears stopped instantly. She stared at me in shock. "But the good news is," I continued, "I'm not your retirement plan anymore, and I'm done auditioning for the role of your ATM. How dare you speak to me that way?" Caroline hissed, all pretense of illness suddenly gone. "I'm lying here in a hospital bed and you're being cruel and heartless." "Are you, though?" I asked, standing up. "Lying here in a hospital bed because you're actually sick? Or are you here because it's the most dramatic setting you could think of for your next financial shakedown?" Caroline's eyes blazed with fury. "Get out. Get out right now," gladly I said. "But first let me save you some time on future performances. The answer to any request for money now or ever is no. The answer to any attempt to make me feel guilty for your financial choices is no. The answer to any manipulation, any sob story, any emergency that requires my bank account to solve is no." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Caroline, next time you want to fake a medical emergency, you might want to skip the manicure. It's a dead giveaway." I left her sitting in that hospital bed, sputtering with rage and disbelief. For the first time in our relationship, I had refused to play her game. And she had no idea what to do with that. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable to me just a year earlier. I called every single person who had attended Caroline's gratitude gathering, and a few who hadn't. I had their contact information because Caroline had tagged them all in her social media posts, and I'd spent the previous evening compiling a comprehensive list. I didn't tell them about Caroline's financial manipulation. I didn't complain about her treatment of me. I simply shared some interesting information I'd discovered about their mutual friend's situation. Hi, this is Hallie, Caroline's daughter, I'd begin. I'm calling because I wanted to thank you for the beautiful spa gift you contributed to at Mom's party. She was so touched by everyone's generosity. I also wanted to let you know, since you've been such a good friend to her, that she and David are going through a really tough financial time right now. They're actually quite a bit behind on their bills, including the payments on their Aspen vacation home. I thought you might want to know in case they reach out for help. You know how proud Caroline is. She'd never want to burden her friends with her problems. The beauty of this approach was that I wasn't lying about anything. Caroline and David were behind on their bills. They were struggling financially, and Caroline was proud, too proud to admit that her lifestyle was completely unsustainable. But by framing it as concern for Caroline's pride, rather than a warning about her manipulation, I was able to accomplish several things at once. First, I was inoculating her social circle against future financial requests. Second, I was subtly undermining the image of success and prosperity that Caroline had been projecting. And third, I was creating a network of people who would be watching her behavior much more carefully going forward. Within 48 hours, the effects were visible. Caroline's social media posts suddenly became much less frequent. The carefully curated images of her luxury lifestyle stopped appearing. And according to my private investigator, yes, I was still monitoring their financial situation. Several of Caroline and David's creditors had been contacted by concerned friends, offering to help mediate payment plans. Caroline's community of enablers was transforming into a community of financial counselors, and she hated every minute of it. The final blow came 2 weeks later, when I received a call from my cousin Rebecca, David's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. Hallie, I need to ask you something, Rebecca said without preamble. Did you really promise to help Caroline and David buy their Aspen house? What makes you think I did? I asked. Because Caroline's been using your supposed contribution to secure financing for months. She told their real estate agent, their contractor, even some of their friends who invested in the property that you were, covering a significant portion of the down payment. Now the whole deal is falling apart, and everyone wants to know where your money is. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was worse than I'd thought. Caroline hadn't just been lying to manipulate me. She'd been committing financial fraud using my name and reputation to secure investments and credit from other people. Rebecca, I never promised to help with the Aspen house. I never even knew about it until recently. Caroline has been using my name without my permission. Oh God, Rebecca whispered. Hallie, there are a lot of people who are going to lose money on this. Friends, contractors, even some family members. What are we going to do? We're going to let Caroline explain herself, I said. This is her mess. She needs to clean it up. But even as I said it, I knew Caroline wouldn't clean it up. She'd just find new lies to tell new people to manipulate new ways, to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to walk away from Caroline's manipulation. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who she really was. I spent the next week putting together a comprehensive dossier of Caroline's behavior over the past year. Financial records showing her spending patterns. Screenshots of her social media posts documenting her fake medical emergencies. Testimony from the private investigator detailing her fraudulent claims about my involvement in the Aspen property. Then I did something Caroline would never have expected from her doormat daughter. I sent copies of everything to everyone who'd been affected by her lies. The real estate agent, the contractors, the friends who'd invested money, even the relatives who'd been calling to shame me for not supporting my sick mother. I included a cover letter that was professional, factual, and devastating. Dear friends and family, I'm writing to clarify some misconceptions about my involvement in Caroline Matthews' recent financial ventures. As you'll see from the enclosed documentation, I have never agreed to provide financial support for any of Caroline's projects, including the Aspen property purchase. Any claims to the contrary are false and were made without my knowledge or consent. I'm sharing this information because I believe you have the right to make informed decisions about your own financial involvement with Caroline and David. I hope this helps clarify the situation. Sincerely, Hallie. Within 24 hours, Caroline's entire social network knew the truth. The contractors put liens on the Aspen property. The investors demanded their money back. The real estate agent threatened legal action for fraud. And Caroline finally got to experience what it felt like to be completely alone with the consequences of her own actions. She called me once screaming and crying and threatening to sue me for defamation. I listened to her rage for exactly 30 seconds, then said, Caroline, everything in that letter was true. If you want to sue me for telling the truth, go ahead. But you might want to use the money for a good lawyer instead. I think you're going to need one. Then I hung up and blocked her number. That was 3 months ago. I haven't heard from Caroline since, though I heard through Rebecca that she and David lost the Aspen house and had to sell the Tesla to pay their debts. Sophia apparently cut contact with them after discovering that Caroline had been lying about the pregnancy to manipulate people into giving them money. The house of cards that Caroline had built with lies and manipulation had finally collapsed, and everyone could see the foundation of deception underneath. As for me, I'm living my life on my own terms for the first time in 34 years. I wake up every morning without wondering if Caroline will try to manipulate me. I make plans without considering how they might affect her narrative about our relationship. I spend my money on things that bring me joy, instead of things that might earn her approval. And you know what I've discovered? Freedom feels a lot like peace. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting Caroline out of my life. They want to know if I miss having a mother, if I feel guilty about walking away from family. Here's what I tell them: you can't miss something you never actually had. Caroline was never really my mother in any meaningful sense. She was a user who happened to share my DNA. And family isn't about blood relations or social expectations. It's about people who show up for you, support you, and love you without conditions or hidden agendas. I don't have Caroline in my life anymore. But I have Rebecca, who called to warn me about the financial fraud. I have friends who celebrated when I finally set boundaries. I have a community of people who care about my well-being without expecting anything in return. That $57,000 Tesla taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes the most expensive gift you can give someone is the gift of showing you exactly who they are. And sometimes the most precious thing you can give yourself is the gift of believing them. Caroline showed me exactly who she was, and I finally believed her. The war is over, and for the first time in my life I won. 6 months have passed since I last spoke Caroline's name out loud, and people still ask me the same questions. Did I do the right thing? Was I too harsh? Shouldn't I have given her another chance? After all, she was my mother. Let me tell you what happened after the dust settled, because the real lessons came in the quiet moments that followed the war. 2 weeks after I sent out those documents, I received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma, knocked on my door with a business card and a gentle smile. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, she said. Rebecca Matthews gave me your contact information. She's concerned about you, and frankly, after hearing your story, I think you might benefit from someone to talk to. I almost laughed. I'm fine, I said automatically. I've handled everything. The situation is resolved. Dr. Chen tilted her head slightly. Hallie, you just dismantled a 34-year relationship with surgical precision and exposed a network of financial fraud that affected dozens of people. You might be handling it well, but that doesn't mean it hasn't affected you. She was right, of course. I invited her in. Over the next few months, those therapy sessions became the most important conversations of my life. Not because I regretted my decisions, I didn't, but because Dr. Chen helped me understand something crucial about the difference between justice and healing. What you did was necessary, she told me during our 4th session. You protected yourself and others from continued harm. But Hallie, there's a difference between winning a war and processing a lifetime of trauma. Victory doesn't automatically equal peace. She was right again. I had won the war against Caroline's manipulation, but I hadn't yet dealt with the deeper wounds, the decades of feeling unworthy, the constant need to prove my value, the fear that everyone would eventually abandon me like Caroline had. The healing process was harder than the fighting had been. At least during the conflict, I had a clear enemy and obvious strategies. Healing meant sitting with uncomfortable emotions, examining my own patterns, and learning to trust that not everyone in my life would try to exploit me. I learned that children of narcissistic parents often develop what therapists call hypervigilance, part we become. So good at detecting manipulation and protecting ourselves from abuse that we sometimes struggle to recognize genuine love. When it appears, we mistake healthy relationships for traps because we're so used to relationships having hidden costs. Dr. Chen helped me see that my victory over Caroline was just the beginning. The real work was learning to believe I was worthy of love without having to earn it, without having to prove it, without having to pay for it with money or sacrifice or perfect behavior. This process led me to some unexpected discoveries about myself and about the nature of toxic relationships in general. First, I realized that Caroline's treatment of me had never actually been about me. Narcissists don't see other people as fully human. They see them as either useful or not useful. I could have been the most perfect daughter in the world, and Caroline still would have used me as an ATM because that's what she needed me to be in her internal economy. This realization was simultaneously liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it meant I could stop wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could have been better. Heartbreaking because it meant I'd spent 34 years trying to earn love from someone who was literally incapable of giving it. Second, I discovered that my story wasn't unique. During one of our sessions, Dr. Chen mentioned a support group for adults from dysfunctional families. I was skeptical at first. I'd never been much for group anything, but I decided to try it. Sitting in that circle of folding chairs in a church basement listening to other people tell their stories, I felt less alone than I'd felt in years. There was Stephen, whose father had drained his college fund for gambling debts. There was Jennifer, whose mother had sabotaged every relationship she'd ever had because she couldn't stand the competition for Jennifer's attention. There was David, yes, another David, whose parents had used his successful business as their personal bank account until he finally had to choose between bankruptcy and cutting them off. The details were different, but the pattern was identical. Loving, well-meaning people who'd been exploited by family members, who saw them as resources rather than human beings. People who'd spent years asking themselves the same questions I'd asked. How could they do this to me? What did I do wrong? Shouldn't family mean something? Here's what I learned from those brave people sharing their stories. Family should mean something. It should mean love, support, protection, and unconditional acceptance. But when family becomes a source of harm rather than healing, when love becomes conditional on what you can provide rather than who you are, then the word family is being used as a weapon against you. The third and most important discovery came 6 months into therapy during a session where Dr. Chen asked me a question that changed everything. Hallie, she said, if a stranger had treated you the way Caroline treated you, the emotional abandonment, the financial manipulation, the public humiliation, the fraud, would you have tolerated it for 34 years? Of course not, I said immediately. I would have cut them out of my life after the first incident. So why did you tolerate it from Caroline? I sat with that question for a long time. Finally, I said, because she was my mother. Because I thought I owed her something. Because society tells us that family is everything that you should forgive family. Anything that cutting off family makes you a bad person. Dr. Chen nodded. And how did that belief serve you? It hadn't served me at all. It had nearly destroyed me. This led to what I now call my family manifesto, a set of principles I wish I'd learned 30 years earlier. Blood relation does not automatically entitle someone to access to your life, your emotions, your resources, or your energy. Family is earned through behavior, not granted through biology. Love without respect is not love at all. It's manipulation wearing a pretty mask. If someone claims to love you but consistently treats you with disrespect, dismissal, or cruelty, their actions are telling you the truth about their feelings, not their words. Your emotional, physical, and financial well-being are not sacrifices you owe to anyone, regardless of their title in your life. Parents, siblings, children, spouses, nobody has the right to destroy your peace for their comfort. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. You can forgive someone for your own healing without allowing them back into your life to cause more harm. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from resentment, not about giving harmful people more opportunities to hurt you. Setting boundaries is not cruel. It's necessary. The people who get angry when you set boundaries are usually the people who were benefiting from you not having any. But here's the most important lesson I learned. Healing from toxic family relationships isn't just about cutting off the toxic people. It's about learning to build healthy relationships to replace what you've lost. This brought me to what I now consider the most beautiful chapter of my story. Remember Rebecca David's sister who called to warn me about Caroline's fraud. After everything settled, she reached out again, not with family drama or crisis, but with a simple invitation to coffee. "I owe you an apology," she said when we met. "I've known about Caroline's behavior for years, but I convinced myself it wasn't my business. I watched her manipulate you, and I did nothing to stop it. I'm sorry." That conversation led to a real relationship, the first genuine family connection I'd ever experienced. Rebecca didn't want anything from me except my company. She didn't need me to solve her problems or fund her lifestyle. She just enjoyed talking to me, laughing with me, being around me. Through Rebecca, I met other relatives I'd been cut off from during Caroline's reign of manipulation. Cousins who'd been told I was difficult and selfish. Aunts and uncles who'd been fed stories about my unreasonable behavior. Once they learned the truth about Caroline's manipulations, many of them reached out with their own stories of her attempts to exploit them. I discovered I had an entire extended family I'd never known because Caroline had systematically isolated me from anyone who might have offered me support or perspective on her behavior. The most surprising relationship that emerged was with Sophia. 3 months after Caroline's world collapsed, I received a text from my half-sister that I never expected. "Hallie, I owe you a massive apology. Can we talk?" When we met for lunch, Sophia looked like she'd aged 5 years and 5 months. "I had no idea," she said immediately. "I knew Mom could be dramatic, but I didn't realize she was actually committing fraud. I didn't know she was using your name to secure financing for the house." "And the pregnancy lie," she shuddered. "I can't believe she told people I was pregnant to manipulate them into giving her money." Sophia explained that she'd grown up seeing me as the difficult sister who'd abandoned the family and caused Mom unnecessary stress. Caroline had spent Sophia's entire life carefully crafting a narrative where I was the villain and she was the long-suffering mother trying to maintain a relationship with her ungrateful eldest daughter. But when everything came out, Sophia said I started looking back at other things with new eyes. The way Mom would get sick whenever you'd set a boundary. The way she'd post about family gatherings on social media but never actually invite you. The way she'd talk about your selfishness while asking me to call you for money she needed. I realized I'd been part of her manipulation campaign against you without even knowing it. This conversation with Sophia taught me something profound about how narcissistic family systems work. Caroline hadn't just manipulated me. She'd manipulated everyone around me, including my own sister, to create a network of people who would pressure me to accept her abuse. Sophia and I are building a relationship now, slowly and carefully. She's dealing with her own trauma from growing up as Caroline's golden child, a role that came with its own form of abuse, just dressed up prettier. These new relationships, Rebecca, the cousins, even Sophia, have shown me what healthy family connections actually look like. They're based on mutual respect, genuine care, and shared joy rather than obligation, guilt, and transaction. But the most important relationship I've built is with myself. I'm dating now, something that would have been impossible when I was still trying to earn Caroline's approval. I'm seeing someone wonderful, a man named Tom, who's a librarian, with kind eyes and zero tolerance for drama. When I told him my story, he didn't suggest I should reconcile with Caroline for the sake of family peace. He didn't minimize her behavior or suggest I should be the bigger person. He just said, "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself." That took incredible strength. That response, support instead of pressure, admiration instead of judgment, still sometimes brings me to tears. I'm also pursuing dreams I'd put on hold for decades. Remember how I mentioned Caroline found an old photo of me with a guitar? I've started taking music lessons again. Turns out at 35, I can still learn new songs, still find joy in creating something beautiful. I volunteer now at a local organization that helps people escape financial abuse. My experience with Caroline, combined with what I learned in therapy, has given me insights that help others recognize and break free from exploitation by family members. Every week, I sit across from someone who's asking the same questions I used to ask. How could they do this to me? What did I do wrong? Shouldn't family mean something? And every week I get to share the answers that took me 34 years to learn. But here's what I want you to understand. If you're listening to my story and recognizing pieces of your own life in it, your situation is not hopeless and you are not powerless. The person exploiting you might have more experience at manipulation than you have at resisting it. They might have convinced everyone around you that you're the problem. They might have made you believe that you deserve their treatment, that you've brought it on yourself, that this is just how families work. None of that is true. You deserve relationships that add to your life instead of draining it. You deserve love that doesn't come with invoices attached. You deserve family that feels like home, not like a battlefield. And if the family you were born into can't provide that, if they insist on treating you like an ATM instead of a human being, then you have the right to build a chosen family that will. I'm not going to lie to you, walking away from toxic family is hard. Society will pressure you to reconcile. People will tell you that blood is thicker than water, that family is everything, that you'll regret cutting them off when they're gone. But I've been without Caroline for 9 months now, and I don't regret it for a single day. What I regret is the 34 years I spent trying to earn love from someone who was never going to give it. So, here are the questions. I want to leave you with the questions that might change your life the way they changed mine. If someone in your family is consistently causing you stress, anxiety, financial hardship, or emotional pain, why are you allowing it to continue? What are you afraid will happen if you set boundaries? And what might your life look like if you chose your own well-being over their comfort? Are you living your own life? Or are you performing in someone else's drama? Are your relationships based on love and mutual respect or on guilt and obligation? Are you giving your energy to people who appreciate and nurture you, or to people who see you as a resource to be exploited? If a stranger treated you the way your family treats you, what would you do? If your best friend was in your exact situation, what advice would you give them? And if the people who claim to love you are consistently making your life worse instead of better, is it possible that what they're offering isn't actually love at all? These aren't easy questions. The answers might be even harder. But I promise you, this living authentically surrounded by people who genuinely care about your well-being is worth whatever temporary discomfort comes with making necessary changes. My $57,000 Tesla taught me that sometimes the most expensive gifts are the ones that finally show us the truth. But the most valuable gift I've ever given myself is the gift of believing that truth and acting on it. Caroline showed me exactly who she was. I finally believed her, and believing her set me free. The war is over. The healing has begun. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving, I'm actually living. Your life is waiting for you too. The question is, when will you be ready to claim it?